Thanks for joining us, everyone who's just joining the webinar right now. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes. Feel free to tell us where you're coming from today in chat, and we'll be started here in a second.
Thank you, Dylan. And then for those of you that are joining in, we are wrapping up today with week 6 of this free live stream series that we've started called Zoom Chats through AIGA Detroit. So AIGA Detroit, for those of you tuning in, we are the professional organization for designers. We're based here in Detroit for our chapter. There are chapters all over the US. And we're really excited to have both Rachel and Sam, designers from Civilla's team. Civilla is a nonprofit design studio based out of Detroit. They'll be presenting today, and we're excited to have both of them here. Also wanted to let you guys know just some housekeeping. For those of you that are tuning in and joining us right now in Zoom, if you do have questions for Rachel and Sam, feel free to use the Q&A button. If you go to the bottom part of your screen in Zoom, in that dashboard, there's going to be a Q&A button. If you select that, you'll be able to type in your questions for both of them, both as they're presenting and then during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. So just so you guys know, feel free to type in those questions and they will be addressed towards the end of the presentation when we will have some dedicated time for you guys to dialogue directly with both Rachel and Sam. I know audio for you guys is disabled within this webinar, but you will be able to ask questions in a written form within the Q&A section. For those of you that are tuning in either through YouTube, Twitter, or on Facebook through the live stream, feel free to ask questions within the comment section and Dylan will get those questions to both Rachel and Sam. So feel free to ask away any questions that you have related to anything that they're presenting, related to their studio, or if you have some general design questions, just feel free to utilize the comment section. And then for those of you that are here in Zoom, again, just use that Q&A button. And like Dylan mentioned at the beginning, let us know where you're joining in from, if you're here in Zoom or whichever platform you're tuning into. Just feel free to leave a comment. You know, if you're tuning in from Detroit or you're tuning in from Texas or Maine or Mexico or Latvia, wherever in the world you're tuning in from, we want to welcome each of you. We're excited to have you here. Part of this Zoom series. And with that being said, I want to introduce both Sam and Rachel from Civilla Detroit. Civilla has been doing some really beautiful and smart design work. Specifically, they're going to be talking about the Reform Project, how they took almost a 50-page document and really streamlined it, and that collaborative process that they used in really making this in conjunction with the community, not for the community, but really working with people. So really excited to have both of you here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and Rachel and Sam, if you wanna go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then feel free to start the presentation.
Thank you, Maria.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I can kick it off here. So, hey everyone, it's great to meet you. My name's Sam Brennan. I'm a design lead with Civilla. I've been with the organization about 4 years. Started work in the private sector doing process improvement actually for a steel mill service provider. Knew that that wasn't a long-term fit and was looking to get back to mission-driven work and had a deep interest in human-centered design. came onto the team as a fellow, and then has been full-time ever since. Over the 4 years, the majority of my work has been focused on improving access to public benefits in the state of Michigan. And that's some of the work that we're going to be walking you into today. And I just realized I totally missed the boat, Rachel. We had a great photo of the two of us. Well, everyone, there it is.
Awesome. So I'm Rachel Rosenbaum. This is Sam and I. We play Frisbee, but I, like Sam, came to the team looking to do more deeper and mission-driven work. I got interested in human-centered design in college and then moved to Detroit about 6 years ago and was working at an automotive company where I was doing a lot of teaching of design thinking, but felt like it was really important to learn how to actually not just come up with ideas, but implement them, and learned about Civilla and started hanging around there. So I've officially been on the team for about 1.5 years, but similar to Sam, did a fellowship beforehand. And today I work both on the project team, doing some work with the Department of Health and Human Services and also a few newer projects. And then I also work on what we call our way work. And so we're capturing and sharing a lot of the work that we do through a podcast and through a monthly email and an annual newspaper. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to get to work on both teams. And we're both just really excited to share the story with you today. So before we dive into the actual project we wanted to share, we wanted to show this photo to all of you. You may have seen it. It's something that I think is often shared in the design world, but it's a photo. We actually have this printed on a poster board, and we show it to every single person who walks into our doors at Civilla. For those of you who have or have not been, we have a fairly large space that people come to visit. And so we like to ground everyone in, why are we here and what is the work that we do? And so what you're seeing here is something that happens in so many of our institutions. We spend a lot of money and time building these elaborate paths. And if we had just spent some time up front understanding the user needs, we could have saved a lot of money, a lot of time, built a much shorter and cheaper path. And we see this not just in physical paths, but if you think about, hospitals and airports and schools, you've probably all come across systems that don't feel like they're designed for you, but instead were designed in a boardroom with a lot of decisions made based on what the institution needs as opposed to what you as a user of that system needs. And so here at Civilla, we're really focused on trying to spend a lot of time up front, getting to deeply understand those users and then design systems around them rather than the other way around. So today, we want to walk you into the story of Project Reform. This picture you're seeing here is actually the old application for public benefits in the state of Michigan. It was the longest public benefits form in America at over 1,800 words, 42 pages, and over 1,000 questions, including what was the date of conception of your child. And so we had worked to redesign this project over the course of about 2 years. And there are so many different phases to this project. We could spend a lot of time talking about, but we hope to lift up some of the most important phases that we think will interest you specifically. But if there are questions that you have, things you want to learn more about, please feel free, as Maria said, to add questions to the chat or to the question and answer. We would love to dig into what you're most interested in.
So Project Reform began talking with residents in living rooms, coffee shops, with community partners about their experience navigating the public benefit system. I want to introduce you to the first person that we talked to. This is Dr. Latina Denson. A few things that I want you to know about Latina. She has a PhD in urban planning from the University of Delaware. She graduated from Michigan State University. She was the first in her family to go to college. She had started her own consulting practice across the United States, but when she was 35, she had a significant stroke. She lost the ability to walk, talk, and write, and for the first time, she needed to access benefits. Her mom ended up needing to take charge and hiring a lawyer to help her navigate the application and the process, which ended up taking months for her. We talked to many residents across Michigan, and no matter the background of people who we met, whether age, race, or income, we consistently started to hear some common themes that I just want to walk you into. One of the first things that started to emerge was that for residents navigating this public benefit system, that there was no clear path. They described the system feeling like a muddled and cosmic force, and it was left up to fate if they would receive the benefits that they're eligible for. We heard stories of how the system felt dehumanizing and how applicants felt more like numbers and data rather than humans arriving with a full life story. Residents talked about how when they're applying for benefits, it felt like they were entering a fraud prevention system and that you're guilty until proven innocent. And so we started getting a real grasp on what the experience was like for residents who were entering into the system. And we wanted to learn more about what it was like on the other side of the desk for those caseworkers who are processing these applications processing these benefits. And so we partnered with an MDHHS office in Hamtramck. And one of the very first people we talked to was Akila. She's a caseworker at the Hamtramck office. She arrived with a degree in social work and had joined the department looking to make a positive impact in her community. In terms of like working with caseworkers, like Akila is the caseworker that you want on your case. She is so thoughtful. She is so kind. But I want to lift up some of the insights that started to make a part of not only Akila's story, but also some of the other caseworkers that we worked with. One of the first things they brought up was just some of the reality of their days. We had heard from staff how the workload has shifted within the department over the years. Back in 1999, a caseworker like Akila would have had 300 cases that they'd be in charge of managing. By 2015, we were talking to them. When we were talking to them, it was at 750. It's since grown to 840. And as a result, there's a lot of effects that come from this. Staff talked about having to service the system rather than getting to serve the people that their cases represent. They talked about having to be an eligibility worker instead of being able to really solve the problems that their clients are walking in the door with. And the frustration that comes from not having the time to be able to go deep with clients, but because of the volume and the velocity of the work, only really being able to stay at that surface level. And so in talking with both residents and with staff, we started to realize that this was a system that really isn't working for anyone. So in January of 2016, we walked state leadership through a full exhibit of these insights. I wish we could walk you guys there now. But one of the first things that happened was when state leadership stepped off the elevator into our office, we had them sit down in our hallway and actually just take the experience of what is it like to fill out this application. For 3 out of the 4 leaders there, it was the first time that they were getting their hands on the application. And we say this not to slight them, but there's a million reasons and all the responsibilities that they have to focus on. But just to say that it was a moment of new context for these leaders, where they were able to get their hands on the application and really see what it was like as a resident to have to go through these forms. This is a little bit of a snapshot into the space. It was the first thing that they walked through. This is a 150-foot long journey map that tells the story of residents trying to apply for public benefits and all of the steps that they need to go through in order to get to the end. When you walk along this story, there's dozens of points along this map that could be redesigned. But through research, it really became apparent of how much of a key domino the application was in changing the experience for clients navigating this system. Out of that walkthrough in 2016, we started partnering with the state to work on a full redesign of the 1171 application. We started working with workers like Ms. Lewis here to understand what is required in these forms, what are the key pain points, what matters to them, and on the flip side of this thing, doing the same thing with residents, really getting clear of like, how do you want to interact with the form? What language makes sense? How can we make these forms a heck of a lot better? And so some design principles started to emerge. These forms, they need to be short. People are in a moment of need when they're coming to DHS to try to access benefits. It shouldn't be taking hours to fill out an application. They need to be simple. Everyone should be able to understand what's being asked of them so that they can answer it correctly. And they need to be relevant. They shouldn't be getting asked a bunch of questions that aren't pertinent to their life or to the programs that they're trying to access. So in some of this redesign, I just wanted to, I know for this group, this might be in particular interesting, is just some of the design choices that started getting made within the application as we started working our way through it. Residents talked about on the left side, just like the density of the text, feeling like they're having to squeeze their information into tiny boxes. And so we started playing with how white space and color would start to create a different feel for the forms, how having clear plain language throughout the forms would increase understanding, how introducing clear hierarchies so that it's really simple, like what is going on this page. And even small details like these boxes, we spent a lot of time getting really clear that these blue boxes help indicate where a client needs to put their information. Working with Latina in particular, she mentioned the fact that like actually having that line along the bottom of the box plays a really key role in helping stabilize writing for folks. And then on the flip side for caseworkers, having that blue and the right shade so that when it gets scanned into their systems, it's disappearing. And the only thing left is just the client information that they're needing. So there's a lot of design choices that went into these, but those were just a few that wanted to lift up. And so we started moving towards a pilot with a form that had gone through a number of revs with caseworkers, with residents. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel here and have her walk us into some of that.
Thank you, Sam. And then Rachel, yeah, you're on mute. There we go. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so going back a little bit, so before we could actually go live with the forms that you just saw the cover photo of, we had to basically pass through a formidable barrier, which is this 1,700-page departmental policy manual. And so while we had designed something that we felt really met the needs of the caseworkers and the users, the residents, we had to make sure that we addressed every single policy in this manual before it could actually be rolled out across the state. And so within this, it took about 6 months to review and ensure that it met federal, state, and departmental policies. And it was actually interesting to see for the first time within the Department of Health and Human Services, the 5 policy groups for all the different programs were actually brought together for the first time to have to say, how might we ask questions and what questions do we all need to know in common? And what unique questions do we need to ask so we continue to streamline this process? And so as you've all probably experienced, institutions like government are not always the easiest to navigate. They're entrenched organizations. They have a lot of policies and procedures and hierarchy, and for good reason, a lot of times. But in order to bring this project to life, we really had to leverage a variety of approaches. And so we looked nationally at best practices. We really relied heavily on some top leadership to overcome barriers and create space for us to step in. We worked across departments with various the policy groups, technology and legal, and a lot of others to ensure that we had buy-in, even advocacy groups. And then also most importantly for us is the bottom-up approach, bringing in the frontline worker and residents' perspective every time we had a conversation to ensure that the design was continuing to be rooted in their feedback and their needs. So when we look back at the old form, what we really began to understand as to why it was the length that it was, we get the question often, you know, do you think they do this intentionally? And some of the reason that these forms become the way that they are is just as a result of years of adding requirements and adding. And so what we began to discover is that this form was really designed for the 1% of cases. They were the most complex. It tried to address every situation. And this is really, you know, for the majority of people, 99% of people, a lot of these questions don't actually apply. And so as we started to redesign the form, we thought about the 60 to 80%. So the new application was designed around this group of people, those who are coming into the DHS lobby and have a case that can, be addressed with certain questions. Knowing that there's going to be a caseworker who is following up and conducting an interview anyway. And if there are complex cases, they can follow up on those questions and make sure they get addressed. So through the design, we were really excited to see that we were able to significantly streamline the application. The new design was 80% less words and questions than the old application, and it was also 60% shorter. So it went from 42 pages down significantly. And yeah, we were really excited to bring this to life. So as soon as we had the design and it had passed through all the policy, we now need to start testing it in the live stream, knowing that there are probably issues that would come up that we hadn't come into contact with yet. And so we piloted with 2 offices in the state of Michigan and started to collect data on the hundreds of applications that were being given out. And through this testing, we really saw significant shifts in both the resident and the staff experience with these forms. And so just a few of the data points. One is that the pilot revealed there was a 60% decrease in the time to apply. The forms were coming in significantly more complete. So the average completeness continued to rise to 93% as residents were able to answer the questions on their own and understand those questions so that they could really give the correct answer. And then finally, accurate. The average time that caseworkers spent correcting errors was decreased by about 75%. So because residents were able to understand the questions and answer them, that also meant that caseworkers could spend a lot less time having to go back and figure out how to correct them. So finally, the processing time decreased. So for caseworkers, this decreased from 50 minutes of processing one application to 29 minutes. And when we start to think about the 5,000 caseworkers across the state of Michigan, multiplying all this time saved, it's fairly significant. So that's a little bit about the pilot that led us to the actual state rollout that Sam is going to bring us through.
And Maria, I know we're at 20 minutes. We can stop there, or there's some pieces on the design of the implementation that we'd love to walk through as well.
Feel free to go through that.
Okay. So 1 second here. So out of the design of the paper application, it was really important that this work got transferred onto the online so that the two would match and make sense. So a whole nother body of work took place on taking some of those learnings, especially around the language, but then pairing them with solid digital design to be able to meet user needs, both for the application, but then also for the online portal where people manage their benefits. So the team partnered with the department in doing all of that user testing with residents and with staff to make sure that it reflected the paper application. A couple significant outcomes that came out of that was a shift in the department to start moving towards mobile first. As we working with residents, the most common way people were applying was on their phones. And so making sure that it was set up for mobile. And then also just reducing that time to apply, taking it down from 45 minutes online down to 15 minutes. And so with these, with the new paper application, with the new online application, the question became like, how do we prepare the staff for this change so that that they're ready for it when it goes live? And one of the biggest things that we had heard working with MDHHS staff was how often rollouts tend to be a bit disjointed, and they're not always up on what's going to happen. And often it's sent out in a memo or a webinar, and how they were asking like, how can this rollout be different? And so in designing training, there was a shift where it became peer-to-peer training. It was all in person. It was allowing people time to actually digest the content and not just hear from trainers or folks in Lansing or us even for that matter, but actually hearing from their peers who had run the pilot of what to look out for, how to get ready for it, and how to process these new applications. So that rolled out in the fall of 2017. This was some of the offices as they were finishing up trainings. They were sending in photos to us of their successful trainings. There was also piles and piles of the old applications left over in offices that they got creative in how they were going to reuse them. And it was an important shift because out of this, people were not only ready to process the applications, but they actually got walked along that journey of like why the shift had happened. And so there was that buy-in to help make this work. And it really paid off. When the application rolled out in 2018, we had been warned repeatedly, like set up a war room. Anytime you roll out an implementation of this scale, there's going to be just issues coming out like crazy for the next 90 days. But it really was crickets when these new applications rolled out. It was so smooth in part because everyone was on the same page of what was going to happen. Another piece of it, so that was just internal. Another piece was utilizing the space to walk stakeholders through the same story, because the department's not the only one interacting with residents trying to access public benefits. You have advocacy groups, you have community partners, unions, legislators, and making sure they were aware of the work as well so that they were ready for the change too. This was actually just a pilot office, just celebrating the end of it, and that the forms were rolling out. And the really, I guess, the neat part of the story is that since that rollout in 2018, there's really just been a continuation of the work, starting to look at, because part of the thing is we know that once people are able to access benefits, that's actually not the end of the story. There's things like here, like renewals, where, coming up on the 6-month and the year mark, you have to renew those benefits. Similarly difficult forms that leads to people falling off of benefits, suffering gaps in coverage, and then having to reapply. And the department recognizing, can we bring similar intention to redesigning these forms so that we have more stability for our clients? And I know we're a little over time, so I think we can wrap it up there and open it up for questions.
Sam, feel free to keep going. So we bake in some extra time just in case this, the guest speakers need that. So feel free, if there's any additional information that you and Rachel want to share, feel free to do that.
Rachel, I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add.
I think the only thing that's been interesting, so along with the renewal forms over the last few years, we've also been working with the state to redesign their portal. So Sam mentioned the application being redesigned so that the paper application mirrored the online. And we've also partnered with them and their tech vendor to just ensure that the experience is really easy for residents to utilize from their homes. So they don't have to go into the offices. And just I think relevant in this current crisis that we're in, they've been seeing such a huge increase in the need for benefits, and just seeing the numbers that had increased of people accessing that portal. And I think it was just, we give a lot of credit to the state for recognizing that it was important to redesign that and investing the time to say, what do users really need? And I think that's shown up really well for them. And especially over the last few months, I think it's really made a huge difference for residents. And so we're really grateful to be able to have partnered with them on that project and to be able to streamline that process for people.
Nice. Well, this is a prime example of great design at work. So really nice work to both of you and your team that took this on. With that being said, it looks like we can start the Q&A section here. There are already some questions coming in. So there's a question here from Allison. Welcome, Allison. Allison wants to know, did Civilla initiate this conversation about the need for redesign, or was Civilla approached by the state? I can imagine that having the state initiate might be easier.
So Civilla did initiate this conversation with the state. It was, I believe, a reach out to, I hope I don't get this fellow's name wrong, but I believe it was, he's no longer with the state, but Tim Becker. And it was just a call saying, from our CEO saying, hey, we've been doing this research. We had been doing research with residents for a couple of months at that point. We think that we might have something interesting for you, and it would be worth your time if you took a visit down to Civilla. And that was the first time they walked them through some of the insights that we were garnering from our conversations with residents. And that was the first step, and then starting to get access to some of the state's workers so we could start to learn more about how it was for the staff.
Hmm.
He had also, Mike had been walking around in his previous role with the actual, a physical copy of the scroll for years, and he would roll it out in boardrooms. He had discovered it as he had commissioned a social safety net study. And so it was really, I think, of interest to him and the team early on to start to dig in to understand, why is this form the way that it is?
Hmm. Thank you. Okay, and then Adam here has a question. Adam wants to know, curious to learn more about how this project was funded. Was there a client in quotes, or was this self-initiated?
I think it's almost like a yes to all three. I think initially self-funded, then there was some grant funding, and then eventually, client work.
Okay, great, thank you. And then Andy here has a question. Andy wants to know, what was the iterative design process like when working with state officials and local caseworkers? For example, how do you get buy-in on the kinds of accessible language you use in the form, and how many people have to oversee and approve that for it to get into the final design? That's a great question.
That's a really good question. So hi, Andrew.
Sam's life right now.
Yeah. So I think this has been like an area of growth for us as a studio. Is I think part of the work is really getting clear on, when you talk about getting to that accessible language, is just getting really clear on what is required from a federal, from a state, from a department level. And getting that clarity so that then you can figure out where there is flexibility, and then within that flexibility, making as much use of it as you can. So if there are things that, for example, if there is policy or legal language that must be on the form, how can you provide that in a way that it's there and it's able to be consumed by someone, but perhaps there's even like a plain language interpretation of what that is meaning on the form. And so a lot of it is just getting really clear on those requirements so that you can start to then play in the space that you have.
I will say too, Sam has really led the charge and done an amazing job of always asking why. Like, why is this required, and what is the actual requirement? And it's not a question that's often asked, because I think we assume that things are the way they are and they will always be that way. And I think through strong relationships with those teams and developing relationships and being willing to ask those questions, we've started to find opportunities to shift that language to be more plain.
Nice. All right, thank you, Rachel and Sam. And then I think this sort of leads into the next question. So JB wants to know, can you please talk about the politics you had to overcome?
I think when I think of like how Mike would talk about this, one of the pieces that comes up is when people go through the tour of Reform. I think people see kind of something for each side of the aisle. A lot of times when the left is walking through, they see the human story and the support for families. And a lot of times when you have the right walking through, they see the efficiency gains. And so I think that the fact that there was kind of benefits for both sides, that was helpful as we worked through two different administrations as well.
All right, okay. Thank you, Sam. And then another question here from Adam. Adam would like to know, how can you help ensure that new questions don't creep into the application over time? How do you maintain the design principles even after your work is done?
It's funny. This is a good question. This just came up yesterday. The department was really conscious of this. They wanted to make sure that that things didn't just revert back. So they set up a governance process around it, and it's a little bit of using bureaucracy for good. In all honesty, and so once those changes were met, it's setting up a really robust process for if you're wanting a change. The fact that it has to have a really clear reason of why something might get added to the form. And then even once it's through that kind of vetting process, then nothing just goes into the form as is, but it's going to go out and it's going to get user tested. And so just building that that user testing loop into the process has made a really big difference in making sure that the form stays, the way that it's supposed to be.
We've seen that too with other projects we started to do for the first time a couple months ago with another partner. We basically built out an Excel sheet of every design decision that went into the form and backed it up with user quotes. And so as they continued to implement and knowing ahead of time that they were going to get a lot of inputs from legal and from all these different groups, they basically had this, like, they called it their Bible of reasons, to basically say, this is why things are the way they are, and this is why we're not going to change them. And if there is a change, there's a process. And so we'll still see, it hasn't been rolled out yet, so we'll see what happens with that. But it was really the first time that we were able to really codify all those decisions. And I think it really empowered the team at that client to feel like they could really actually take a stand to say, we're not changing this back.
Mm-hmm. That's actually really great to have the users' testimonies or quotes, like you mentioned, that help to back up those decisions. So yeah, really great insights. Let me see here. Next question is from Taft. He says, hello, I have a question about how your team works together on a big project like this. There are so many design skills involved. How do you manage sharing work and making sure all the design team members are on the same page?
It's a good question. Especially for Reform, we were still a really small studio at the time. There was we started with just 5 of us, and there was 6 of us by the end. So it was a lot of just like all hands on deck on most things. And I think in terms of keeping people on the same page, I think that was an advantage for us in some ways. Everyone was kind of in everything, and that helped. In terms of the sharing, I'm not sure if I'm going to have a great answer, honestly, of how it got managed. It was a small team that was really, really all in on this project for a 2-year walk, is the best way I can put it.
And Sam, can you talk a little bit about the makeup of the team at that time?
Yeah, so it was our 3 founders, Mike, Adam, and Lena. Mike, obviously, he came out of his long career with United Way. Adam and Lena were both out of the D School in Stanford and had moved here to Detroit. And then it was Gabby Durantes, who had worked with the design team at United Way for a while, and then had come over to Civilla. Myself, who had joined the team a little bit after that, and then Rachel Carson, who had also done the fellowship with me as well, joined the team towards the end of the project.
And then what was the ratio between like designers, a project manager, strategist? What did that look like?
So Lena really played a key role in just being like the center hub of all of this. She's our design director, and she really drove this project the entire way through. And I think those roles that you just listed, she was playing most of that. We did bring in graphic design support for a portion of the project. And so, but we worked really closely it was an organization called DevMind, but specifically a designer named Janice. And so on the graphic design side, there was DevMind, and then really on the strategy, it was Lena leading it, with Gabby and I primarily focused on the user research.
Okay, thank you, Sam. And then there's a question here from JB. JB wants to know, can you explain the techniques you used for data collection? How did you determine what the 60 to 80% looks like?
Yeah, so I guess there's like kind of two pieces on that. The 60 to 80% was just based on looking at some applications and getting a sense on like, okay, the majority of folks, this is what they're really filling out and what they need to, and just getting clear from talking with policy teams, like where are more edge case questions and where are actually just questions that are applicable to most people. And some of that was honestly a little bit more obvious than I guess then might be at first glance of like, oh, most people, they have a household, they have members, they have some folks have income, they might have some assets, they might have some expenses, and those are the core things that we're needing to gather. For the pilot, it was really getting clear on what is it, the data, what data do we need to collect to be able to tell this story well in the lightest way that we can, but in making sure that it's answering the questions that we want to, in terms of like, are these forms coming in higher quality? Is it changing processing times for caseworkers? And are people being able to get through these forms quicker?
Thank you. Okay, and then Allison here has a question. How did you convince those in the community who share their perspectives to pose for photos? And then it says, we conduct many focus groups with consumers and have asked to take photos and all decline. I'd love to both acknowledge them and also let others recognize how important their voices are to the work we do.
Yeah, it's a great question. Latina really has been just an amazing friend of the organization for letting us use her photograph and also her story in the way that we have. In taking photos with clients, I think the main thing is all of our interviews are one-on-one, and typically, especially early on, there's a lot longer form interviews that we'll do that can sometimes stretch, 2-3 hours, and really spending a lot of time up front in rapport building, getting to know the person that we're talking to, not just on necessarily the public benefits side, but on just their life story. And then also not necessarily just only having that one conversation with the resident, but having follow-up interviews. And I think it's probably in that building of trust that people have felt comfortable enough to let us take their photos and let us share their stories.
It's one of the things that we think about a lot, both with residents that we're interacting with and also the partners, that our relationships are one of the most important assets that we can have in a project to ensure that we're being respectful and sharing and moving towards like this larger purpose together. And it's been amazing. I think Sam would say the same, but for me, coming from a different organization, to see that you're really not just trying to pull information from these individuals to be able to design something for and with them, but actually like build a relationship and really try to understand who they are and their story. And I think that ultimately ends up in some like longer lasting relationships. Latina will come for lunch every so often, just from that initial conversation of meeting her and then building on that.
Yeah, that relationship building is important. So I'm glad you guys mentioned that. And especially with the work that you do, I mean, to have somebody's trust and to know that they are being heard, they're not just, a number or statistic on a page. So that is really, really meaningful. All right, there's another question here from Rebecca. She wants to know what's on the horizon for Civilla and what are your next projects? Great work, she says.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we are continuing work with the department. We mentioned that on the renewals, and those are going to be getting rolled out. Those new forms will be getting rolled out in August. So folks will start receiving those in their mailboxes. We're tackling other work with MDHHS around some of their business processes and policies. Kind of the best way to address it is kind of the messy middle. There's the application on the front end. There's the there's the renewals, and then there's some pieces in the middle that we're going to be working with them on. And yeah, Rachel, I don't know if you want to speak to some of our other work.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we can share yet, but I guess I would say we're starting, as of last fall, really starting to step outside of just working with the Department of Health and Human Services and start to work with other analogous institutions, and really try to like expand our breadth at the type of work that we do, but always carrying the lessons that we're learning from our work with the Department of Health and Human Services into that work. Yeah, we're starting to step into that. We just finished a project on Wednesday, actually. And so now looking forward to what's coming next.
Nice. Thank you. And then Naaman here has a question. Sam and Rachel, I'm curious to hear a little more about the culture and principles at Civilla that help facilitate the deep systematic change that is creating, or that it is creating.
Rachel, you want to take this one?
Sure. Hi, Naaman. Yeah, so culture. One of the things I think that's, every Monday morning, basically we actually start our workday by reviewing our principles and by reviewing what we call our 10-3-1-3, which is our strategic intent, and how we're thinking about the next 10 years, 3 years, 1 year, and 3 months. And I think those principles are both an operating model for us as a team individually, but also the way that we interact with our residents and clients and all of you. And I think, I guess for me, but I think for everybody, they're a way for us to really make decisions that are rooted in the same principles, as opposed to having an emotional response, depending on, the situations that come up. So some of those things include like health is our number one priority. And that is something that we're always trying to value, while balancing that with the quality of work, and that we take responsibility for all that we create. And so I think quality of work and relationships is another one. I think some of those, especially with this kind of work, is really important to say, we're not just going to create something and throw it over the wall and have you go and implement it on your own, but we're really going to be there as much as we can to try to help and partner through that. And I think that perspective has really helped us to build trust with some of these institutions as we navigate the complexity of them.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel. And then are you guys, I know we're ready at 1:45. Are you guys good to take on, looks like there's about 5 questions here?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, Clark here has a question. You invested a large amount of time and effort into understanding the problem prior to actually approaching the client to get the project. Could you share more about how you measure your investment of time and whether you consider this to be spec work, in quotes, or a more strategic investment in the future of your business? Could you elaborate?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have the clearest answer on that. I know early on, the organization was really in an exploratory phase. It was a brand new organization, and it was really looking for ways to basically figure out of what that organization was going to be. And then that early work really was, I guess you could call it like passion work. It was work that everyone on the team really wanted to be on. I guess a more strategic investment in the future of your business. I think, I think that it was strategic in that sense, in that it really ended up leading to this area of work that we've really gone deep on. But I don't know if it was, I guess I don't know quite how to answer this one, because I wasn't as involved in it, but it's a good one. It's a good question. I don't know.
It's okay. Yeah, no worries. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And then Sarah here has a question. Have you continued with any user research during the pandemic? And if so, how has that been adapted with social distancing? That's a really great question.
Yeah, it's something I think we were pretty worried about up front, just like, what is it like to build a relationship with somebody virtually, and how do you reach them? And I think, at least for the work that I've been working on, I think we had interacted with some people up front. And so it was a little bit easier to know that we had built that rapport before. But I think, yeah, just spending some time up front, I found even just giving space for people to talk about how they are feeling in this moment allows them to kind of feel like their voice is being heard and their situation is being recognized before we dive into the questions that are more specific to the work that we're doing. I don't know for you, Sam, how that's felt.
Yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment. But yeah, the smartphones have been a real help. Most people being able to come online, be able to see their faces, being able to share some of the prototypes that we're working on has, it's not ideal. And I think that there is, you're losing some of it. But being able to even get some feedback has continued to be a really helpful piece for our work.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And then Adam here has a question related to the graphic design, saying regarding the graphic design, was there a tension between making it visually appealing and making it easy for administrators to update or print, etc.?
Definitely, yeah. There's been tensions around that in terms of making sure that it's going to work with those backend systems. And I think the biggest thing that we've learned up front is to just make sure that you're crystal clear on like what are those administrative requirements, so that you can design to those heading in. So for example, on those renewal forms that we showed there at the end, there was a requirement that those were going to be in black and white. And so that just made it really clear up front of what we were working with. And getting really clear as well on just like when you're talking about updates and printing and such, getting really clear on those technical specs of their correspondence engine so that we could build to that.
All right, thank you, Sam. And then Andy here has a question. Is your podcast coming back for another season?
Currently working on the future of the podcast, so stay tuned. We're hopeful that we'll be able to do another season.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. And please share that with us because we'd be happy to promote it through AIGA Detroit as well.
Okay, yeah, we have whenever we're finished, we do have a slide for those of you that are interested in joining the monthly email or want to receive our newspaper annually, which is called The Chronicle, follow the podcast. So we can share that before we close out.
Okay, perfect. Feel free to pull that up while we wrap up this last question here. So Taft has a question saying, I am a college student and interested in pursuing civic design after graduation. Do you have any advice for a young designer in your field?
I guess the best advice that I would have is any way, anyhow that you can start to find your way onto project work is, I just think the best way to learn is through experience. And so even if that's like volunteering and like through connections, finding your way that you can get onto anything, it's just the quickest way to get a sense of is this the work that you're wanting to be on, and starting to understand better where your own gaps are going to be. I think one thing that we've found more and more within our field is that also building that secondary skill set is a really key piece. So especially if you're going into more of that like design researcher type field, is there that secondary capacity that you can bring to the team?
Great answer.
Early on for me, one of the best advice I ever got when I started even just learning what human-centered design was from a mentor who said, keep practicing as much as you can, and like keep a design journal, and like every time you're practicing, reflect on like what you're learning and how it went and how you can improve. And I still have that today, and I think it was just a great way to stay interested and excited and find other people to connect with and to continue to develop the skill set over time.
I love that idea of having a journal of that reflection of what went well and what could be improved on. I think that's That's a great takeaway. And actually, there's one more question here from Rebecca. What are you reading? Any book recommendations?
So I don't know about anyone else, but pandemic has not been great for my reading. I expected to get a lot of books in, and I'm not reading very much at all. I did bring one as a reread, the book One from Many by D. Hock. He's been a real kind of sage for the organization, and it's on organizational design. And he was the founder of Visa. And so it's like a 3-part book. It's like part on his personal biography, part on the Visa story, but then also on his philosophy of how we could build organizations in a different way than the hierarchical model that is so often seen in our institutions.
I am reading, we actually do spend, Dee is a big nature supporter, and we try to, as much as we can, weave in principles from nature into our work. And I'm reading this book right now called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's really amazing. I could go on and on and on about it. But if you like nature, which I hope all of you do, it's really good.
What was the name again, Rachel?
It's called Braiding Sweetgrass.
Okay, Braiding Sweetgrass. Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you very much, Rachel and Sam, for your time today. Really happy to have you both part of this Zoom chat series. If you wanted to maybe go over some of the things that are on the screen and share that with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for all of those that joined. We love to share the story and invite you all. Once we can go back to the office one day, you're always welcome to come and visit. If you're in Detroit or if you live there, we'd love to walk you through the physical story that we typically share with people. So, but in the meantime, we do have a podcast. There's 4 seasons. Adam, our founder, was the host for the first 2 seasons, and I was the host for the second 2 seasons. It's all about how the behind the scenes about how change happens. So each season is kind of its own unique story and quest, but we think it's pretty fun. There's a monthly email where we're sharing some of our rhythms and rituals and traditions. It's a lot focused on like culture in organizations and small tips and tools. So if you go to our website, civilla.com/newsletter, you can sign up, and then you can also see the long list. I think there's 24 as of this month, little articles on there to read. We've been fairly quiet on Instagram lately because we don't have much to take photos of, but we are on Instagram. And then our website has a lot more if you want to read more deeply into some of our work. Yeah, you can visit that website.
Nice. I'm definitely going to sign up for your newsletter.
Awesome.
Thanks for sharing today. Again, love the work that you guys are doing, this human-centered design approach, and really respect what Civilla is doing, your involvement on the design team and being part of that, and sharing those insights with the Reform Project today with our audience. Really excited to have you both part of this series again, and honored to have you on this platform. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for those who have tuned in, both here on Zoom and through across all of our platforms. Please know that we are hosting this Zoom series through the end of June, so feel free to stay tuned by checking our Instagram page and our website to register for these free weekly chats. So thanks again, Rachel and Sam.
Thank you.
All right, have a great weekend, everyone.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.